People often ask me about the Dwellers Beneath the Arches series. What inspired it? How did it happen? What was going on in my mind when the idea popped into my head? One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the series started over 20 years ago and has been with me for most of my life. Well, apart from the first 8 years. A lot of the stories I write are not inspired by the here and now, but rather the inspiration all began as a child, every single story. This is a quick excerpt from the prequel to the Dweller series. It's called The House on the Hill. The rain lashed against the window panes as the storm raged outside, threatening to shatter them. But the windows resisted the onslaught, fighting the overwhelming downpour as the water cascaded down the stained glass windows, showing up in a myriad of reds, blues, and deep greens. The wind, not to be left out, added to the chaotic storm, as it whistled ferociously and rattled a window looking to the east. The sound resembled the clattering of bones, nerve-wracking and unsettling. It was early November, cold and very wet in London, the weather enough to dampen even the strongest of spirits. The rain had persisted for days, and the sounds of the wintry weather had become just another noise in the fabric of the city. I first started writing this series as a child. I lived in Nigeria at the time, and I remember being in the garden on a particularly sunny day. It was lovely. I heard voices and responded. I'm not sure where they came from, but I responded nonetheless. My grandma happened to be going past at the time and asked who I was speaking to. I guess I must have asked her if she could hear the voices. She wouldn't have taken to that very well. Anyway, the Dwellers series was written on several sheets of paper. I must admit, at this point, that my location tends to influence the books I write. It was initially set in Nigeria. The city I lived in was Lagos, and I imagined there being a secret world right beneath our home. How wonderful would that be? I wrote as much of the story as I could and promptly shelved it. It was over and done with, or that was what my young mind believed. I was always writing stories and putting them away. Many years later, I was in London for a few weeks. It was winter. I was in the front room when I had the urge to pick up that particular story again. I suppose it was my surroundings that inspired it. Here I was in a large Victorian home, sitting by the window. It began to snow, and I pulled out my bundle of papers and got the story out. Suddenly, the tropical setting I'd started to write in was at odds with the cold climate I was suddenly in. So, the setting became London. I began to craft the Dwellers' underground world in finer detail. I imagined the streets as they were outside, cobbled and old. The buildings eccentrically matched. The darkness all around as the snow fell, and the glow from the street lamps. The story was coming alive before my eyes. The streets would all be very narrow in 1821 London, and the Dwellers were in grave danger. They were being pursued and had to keep their world a secret. I imagined a foot chase starting the series off and added that in to the prequel. When I thought of the Dwellers' world, I wanted it to be quirky and immersive. I wanted the readers to believe that such a world could exist beneath us and make it something fascinating that we refused to believe wasn't real. It was supposed to be a series that would take you away to another time and place, removing you from all the ills and troubles of the world. As I wrote it all began to fall into place. London, Victorian England, a rough and poverty-stricken period where the dwellers lived in isolation, with very few knowing of their existence. In a flash, the series had moved from hot and tropical underground Nigeria to cold and foggy Victorian London in winter. I looked down at the once cobbled street below, now covered by a layer of snow. The ideas kept coming. I would make them as strange as possible. I removed the silly happy-go-lucky characters of previous, and in a flash, the series became a lot darker. The humour and light enchantment of the old story was gone, quickly replaced by a more malevolent story that dealt with depression, the social care system, magic, enchantment, human frailties, and a whole host of other issues. As my writing sprint continued, my body and mind were awakened as I put pen to paper. Interestingly, my grandfather came into the living room to watch some television. He observed me, curled up in the corner, writing as though some demons were after me. "Have you got a good idea?" I nodded, completely unaware of how manic and dishevelled I must have looked at the time. Pen and papers everywhere, hair unkempt, and bundled up in the thickest dressing gown. My family didn't care though. Once I got my ideas, they were very good with leaving me alone and letting me carry on, and for that I'm grateful. And the Dwellers Beneath the Arches series was on its way.